Have you ever had something to say, but no words with which to say it? Or perhaps you had an emotion lodged right here in your throat, and try as you might, you couldn't get it out? Or perhaps you had a story to tell, but you didn't know whether once you shared it out loud, whether it would make sense. These were my experiences as I was navigating eating disorder recovery in my teens. And I remember sitting in the doctor's office, hearing the doctor say, "You have anorexia nervosa," and thinking to myself how mismatched this clinical label was to my messy, hot, boiling emotions that were brewing inside of my chest. And I remember in that moment feeling hopelessly lost. In my recovery experiences, I tried many different ways to make sense of what I was going through. I tried talking to my friends, therapists, parents about these experiences. Sometimes I had so much to say that my chest physically hurt with the exertion. And sometimes I had nothing to say at all. I felt nothing at all. Sometimes I tried writing down my experiences in a journal. Sometimes I would fill pages and pages with text. And other times, I would just hold a pen in my shaking hand with nothing to put down on the page at all. In short, recovery was kind of like swimming through a stormy sea with no shore in sight. And something that I think that many of us tend to forget when we're struggling or we don't know where we are, we're feeling lost, is that human beings are remarkably adaptable. Almost as soon as our face hits the cold water, we're already thinking about how to survive, how to thrive in this environment. And as I was navigating recovery, I found that I was already thinking about, hey, what are the spaces in my heart that still need attention and still need healing? What do I need to pay attention to? And I was also learning another important lesson during this time, which was that instead of just being a character in my narrative, I could be the narrator. And this means I could play a really active role in writing my story going forward. Perhaps I didn't quite have a say as to what specific events happened in my life, but I definitely had a say as to which events I wanted to put into my storyline. So you might be sitting here and wondering, why are you telling me all of this? What's all of this about waves and stuff? And why does it matter to you, sitting here in the audience as someone who's grown up in Hong Kong, who calls this place home? Why does it matter to you as a human being who cares about connecting with yourself and with others? Well, I'd like to share with you a couple of characteristics of the Hong Kong culture that I think many of us here will resonate with. And I'll then tie it to my experiences with mental health recovery, and hopefully you'll start to see yourself in this story as well. First of all, we're impatient. I'm sure many of us here can resonate with that. We're either rushing from school activity to work activity to TEDx activity, and we're constantly running around. And then we get to the end of the day, and we lie down in our beds, and we think to ourselves, oh, I still haven't done enough. Sound familiar? Yeah. And when I was in mental health recovery, as I was searching desperately for a safe space to be, safe space where I could be secure, be happy, to get there faster, I saw this particular trait of Hong Kong culture mirrored in my experiences. A second characteristic of our culture is that we're scared of being a burden to other people, and we're scared of showing weakness or vulnerability. We grow up watching our parents and our grandparents hide their emotions, especially when they're grieving, hurt, or frustrated. And what we learn from this is that when we share those soft spots, those tender spaces of our hearts, that we're driving distance instead of fostering connection. I'd like to ask you all to raise your hands if you resonate with some or all of these points. Just raise a hand. And then I'd like you all to look around and see that you're not alone. And these were my experiences as I've navigated my own personal journey with recovery, as well as in my work. As the founder of Body Banter, which is a Hong Kong charity that empowers young people to start conversations about body image and mental health, and as a PhD student here at Hong Kong U, exploring the role that storytelling plays in our experiences and perceptions of mental health and mental illness, I've seen all of these things happen. I've seen that I'm not alone, and all of us are in good company. And today, I would love to share with you 3 lessons that I've learned from my own experiences and from the amazing people who have shared their experiences with me. So without further ado, I'd like all of you to join me on the dance floor. And I promise that this will make a little bit more sense as I get started. All right. So lesson 1. Does anyone know what disco balls are made of? And don't worry, I didn't know this until I Googled this the other day. I was like, what are they made of? And the way that they create those multicolored, multifaceted rays of light that go to every corner of the room is that they use these fragmented mirror tiles. And so what they do is they take in all of that light and they revolve and shine all of that light back outward. In a very similar way, it's those fragmented pieces of our stories and that help us connect with other people in our lives. I'd like to share with you a story of something that happened at the start of Body Banter as we were establishing ourselves. So in those early stages, I remember that many people were sharing their stories for our platform, which was a very simple website, or as one of our teammates who later joined would describe as a very ugly Squarespace site. And in those early days, the stories that we got usually came in the form of prose, so line by line of structured text. And in those days, these were wonderful stories, but one day a person came up to me, a new participant who wanted to join the platform, and she said, hey, I want to share a story, but it doesn't come in the form of a structured prose piece. And I'm wondering if I could try something different. And I was like, absolutely. Go right on ahead. I would love to see it. And she amazed me with what she created. This was a stop-motion video where she had doodled different parts of her experience and laid it over with text and some voiceovers and music. And perhaps this wasn't quite the same as the prose pieces that we had seen on the platform before, but it was a new creative way of putting together her experiences in a way that could resonate with different people who are going to come to our platform, to make someone feel less alone in the different pieces of their experience. And I wanted to share that story with you because I think it illustrates something really beautiful. When we think back to that disco ball, right? It's those fragmented pieces of our experience, those things that we might think are too messy, that people won't understand when we say out loud. It's those pieces that help us connect with the people around us. Okay, so pop quiz. What are disco balls made of again? Yes! I was hoping that people would speak. That's awesome. Thanks for remembering. You pass. And mirror tiles, what do mirrors do, right? They take in what's surrounding them, what's around them, and they reflect it back, right? And in a similar way, when we tell our mental health stories, we're empowering not just ourselves, allowing ourselves to see something different in our experiences, but we also empower the people we're talking to. We're giving them something new to think about. And I'd like to share a story here as well. So there was one time where I was facilitating a lived experience ambassador training. And this is a training workshop where we support people who have lived experiences with mental illness, who are in recovery, and who want to share their stories in public events to challenge the stigma toward mental illness. And in this particular session, we were starting to think about different themes that were arising in people's stories. And someone was like, yeah, it seems like all of us have really benefited from social support and having people around us as we were navigating recovery. And then one ambassador said, this reminds me of a Cantonese phrase called Pui Bun Tong Hang. That means to walk alongside. And he said, during this time, as I was recovering from my mental illness, I realized that it was far less important that people completely understood what I was going through, and far more important that they walked with me through that misunderstanding, through those sticky spaces that I didn't really know and felt really lost in. And in that moment, I remember that it was as if a light bulb went off in everyone's head, and all of a sudden, we had some kind of language for the things that we were experiencing, things that we all found to be true. And I like to call this process lending language, because it's in this way, when we communicate and share our stories with others, that we're able to co-create new perspectives, new ways of expressing ourselves for understanding our own and other people's experiences. We have arrived at the last lesson of the day. I'd like everyone to think back to the last time that you were on the dance floor. Just close your eyes and have a little imagination and think a little bit about that. If you're like me, you'll probably have noticed that there are two kinds of people on a dance floor. Typically, there are some people milling around in the corners and just sipping their drinks. And then there are people who are in the middle of the dance floor just bopping their heads off like no one's watching. And do you know what the disco ball does? It shines a light to the farthest corners of the dance floor. I can't see you back there, but pretend I can. And it says, you're invited. You belong. Come on in and join us. And in a similar way, when we share our stories with mental health, with challenges that we faced, we're inviting people to join the dance, to join us on the middle of the dance floor. Maybe not today, but when they're ready. And I'd like to share one final story for today. So one time, I was delivering a workshop at a school. And if you've delivered workshops at schools, or if you've been a student, you'll know why 2 p.m. on a Friday is the worst time to give a talk. Because you know why? This is the time when people have just finished lunch, they're kind of drowsy, it's also a Friday, so they're like, the weekend! And, you know, people are just like, a talk, what? And so I fully expected, as I was delivering this talk, to see people dozing off. And so, you know, I really wasn't that surprised when I saw a young man at the back of the room, just like, you know, I think in Chinese there's a phrase that's like going fishing or something. I forget it. And I was surprised at the end, though, when he came up to me and he said, hey, sorry I fell asleep. You know how the IB is. And I was like, yeah, I do know how the IB is. It be that way sometimes. And he said to me, but I did hear your story. And I wanted you to know that even though I still have some ways to go in processing my own experiences, I know that at least it's possible now. That at least if I shared it out loud, there's this possibility that I'll be validated, that I'll be heard for my experiences. And I just remember this being one of the most touching moments in my advocacy journey so far. It was so important for me to realize this. And I think this is what I wanted to drive home and bring through, which is that when we hear another person's story, we're witnessing the possibility of vulnerability. And sometimes it's exactly this stimulation of the imagination that allows us to think about what it would be like to start exploring and creating. Again, if not today, someday, when we're ready. So I'd like to wrap up today with the 3 key lessons that we've walked through together today. First, it's your fragmented pieces that foster connection. They're not what drive distance. They're what bring us together. Second, through storytelling, we lend language to each other. We empower one another through the knowledge that we've gained throughout our experiences. And finally, sharing our stories we help one another witness the possibility of vulnerability. We let people know that, hey, even if today's not the day where you share your story, see that it's possible, that one day your story will be heard, that you'll be held when you share it. And as Hong Kong and the world recovers from what has been quite a challenging time, I really hope that we can hold on to these lessons, that we can see that it's those cracks in our hearts that allow the light to shine through, that I capture the light of what it means to be human and emanate that light back around us like a disco ball. Just remember that. Be that disco ball. May we all celebrate those messy pieces. May we remember that our messes, they're our messages. And may we all stand strong in the solidarity of our shared struggles and our strengths. Thank you so much for dancing with me.